is Commerce 2.x, which is Commerce for Drupal 8. If you were looking for Acquis talk on Magento, this is not it. Maybe that's tomorrow. I don't know. My name is Shawn McCabe, and I am the CTO at Acro Media, which is also kind of Commerce Guys, and I will explain really quickly what that means because it's a convoluted and complicated story. So last year, Commerce Guys split up into a number of companies. So Platform.sh used to be part of Commerce Guys, and they split off to become an actual hosting company of Platform.sh, and then Commerce Guys was split up into sort of 3 divisions. So we, Acro Media, purchased the North American part of it. So any service work, building of commerce sites or anything like that comes through to Commerce Guys in North America, that goes to us now. We also can use the Commerce Guys brand and stuff like that, or whatever, for whatever that's worth. There is Commerce Guys France, which was a company called Actualis, bought the rights to Commerce Guys in Europe, but mostly just in the French-speaking countries in Europe, so mostly France, Belgium, Luxembourg. And then the core team, headed by Ryan Sarama, with Boyan Zvanovic and Mac Lamon, stayed on to sort of be the core team that still works on Drupal Commerce itself. So they don't necessarily do that much service work. They would do the core work, and then they would do partnerships, as far as sponsorships with payment gateways or shipping providers, tax things, that kind of stuff. And then they also cover any of the business that isn't covered under those 2 licensing agreements. So that's a bit of the complicated background if I sort of mention Commerce Guys and who the hell Acro Media is and everything. We are based out of Kelowna, by the way, so we are about 4 hours away from here. Me personally, I have been a contributor sort of off and on since the UberCart alpha days, since right about after DrupalCon Boston. My noting example being getting in a big argument with Ryan about using homebrew encryption in UberCart, which I was not a fan of. And so I've worked on it through UberCart and through Drupal Commerce, and then now through Commerce 2.x. Which is Commerce for Drupal 8. So that's nearly 10 years of Drupal experience, almost, or pretty much all of that of which I've been at Acro Media. So why Commerce 2.x and why not just port Commerce to Drupal 8? Well, the same reason most other projects, because Drupal 8 changed a lot. It basically changed everything. So it was decided that for Commerce, let's sort of change along with that. Let's go, use a Symfony base, change everything, to be a lot more object-oriented. Take advantage of sort of all that extra good stuff. We can use form displays, we can use configuration management, we can use all the view stuff that is in core, Symfony, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it was decided to do this big, huge rebuild sort of way back when the planning for Drupal 8 was announced, and that was sort of the path that everything was going on. So it's actually been in the works for quite some time. We'll go into a bit how that, the base that sort of built, we'll kind of go through the timeline of how Drupal Commerce came to be, because it started with this plan to do these sort of base PHP libraries. So if anyone attended DrupalCon in LA, Boyan did a talk about these sort of base libraries. And that they were just PHP libraries, and they hadn't worked too much on Commerce itself because Drupal 8 wasn't even ready. It wasn't alpha, or it was probably still alpha, but it wasn't beta or anything like that at that point. So these are some PHP libraries that they made to help sort of solve a number of these problems that we encounter in Commerce a lot that are not necessarily specific to anything to do with Drupal. They're just specific to Commerce, or in some instances, just web development in general. I'll touch on them pretty quickly just so you have some background, because they will be mentioned further on, but we won't get into them in too much detail because they're mostly just sort of dependency libraries. The tax stuff is to give a standard sort of platform for creating a tax rule, where it applies, what it applies, the percentage it applies, what time frame it goes for. That is sort of a big part of it. So the fact that your taxes will change, January 1st or something like that, the tax rate changes. So you can't just go in there and stay up really late on middle of New Year's Eve and then take a pause for a second after the ball drops and change your taxes over. That you have the concept of taxes applying during various times. So that one, it includes a bunch of default rates for European commerce stuff. That is of sort of mixed benefit. It doesn't include rates for anything outside of the EU and Switzerland. And you probably never will because tax rules are like insane and bizarre. Especially apologies to you Americans here, but like you guys do taxes by county or by like water district or like it's like that's not even a joke. You literally do them by water district. Like it's and so that kind of stuff can get really difficult to handle in tax rules, and they change depending on like which mayor gets elected where and stuff like that. So it's impossible, and you'll probably just end up using some sort of service for that. Address is the next one, and that's just a standard formatting for addresses to handle the fact that there's a, what is it? Is it a province? Is it a state? Is it a municipality? Is it some sort of prefecture or something like that? To handle all those different kinds of setups so that you can sort of pass an address into it and get a consistent address out of it. So addressing, not too much. Zone is the concept of basically a part of parts of an address that make up an area. So whether that is, it uses a state, it uses a province, it uses a zip code, it could even be specific addresses or something to say, hey, these parameters make up a zone that we want to do stuff with, used for taxes, or it could even be for shipping purposes. So you don't have to sort of build these complicated rules out to say if it's in this province, but it's this zone, or if it's, this postal code and stuff. You can kind of set up these zones, and then you can reference the zone. As a dependency. Yeah, it's for sort of anything throughout the fulfillment. For shipping, it's going to be used again in shipping. It's used for taxes, for rate quoting when you need something that's not just a country or a province or something. It's some combination of those things together. Yeah. By the way, feel free to ask questions anytime throughout this. It's probably easier than just asking them once at the end. So. The next one, the internationalization module. I think I've heard this touched on in a couple of other talks. This pulls a whole bunch of data from a library setup that Google uses, and it is to just format things for different countries. So, and specifically where that is important in commerce is with prices and how currencies are displayed and stuff. Where do you use a decimal? Do you use a comma? Where does the dollar sign go? Is it a dollar sign? What is it? How do you display all that kind of stuff? So the thing being that it's this core library that you use where you just take what the price you have, you dump it in, and it comes on the other side as whatever language you need it to be. And that isn't maintained in commerce. It's maintained basically with some data that's pulled from Google to just handle all of that. So we don't have there used to be a whole commerce currency stuff built into commerce and everything, which was like a pain in the ass. You had to do a new release of the module every time someone decided to change how they displayed something or whatever. So that's just handled outside of that. It's just a library people. Enum is very simple. Oh, sorry.
Very quick question. Does that handle commas and decimals for currencies?
Yes. Yeah. For pretty much every country that exists, because Google's pretty thorough on that, so it gets everything. Yeah, that's specifically where to put commas. If you do or don't put commas, when you put decimals, what order, you display things backwards and things like that or something. It's not like multi-language, but it handles all the differences for different regions and stuff. Even between French and English and stuff, it can be different. So, the enum one is just to add, sorry, question?
That's an initial question.
Yep.
So if this goes too far,
Don't worry.
So in multi-currency, there's a
Yep.
set of issues you usually run into. One of them is you set prices in different currencies, or you do automatic kind of currency translation and current exchange rates, those sort of issues.
Yep.
How do you automatically determine the currency that the user sees based on an IP address lookup or something, or does the user choose that?
Yeah. So how it works in commerce.
Ways you use and what currencies and stuff like that.
Yep.
I'm just not very familiar with what is current.
Yeah.
currency.
What Commerce 2 does currently is you can set up, which we'll get to in the slides in a little bit, you can set up stores, and then you basically set a currency for that store, and that's the currency that store is actually going to be processed in. There is going to be support for multiple currencies per store, but the concept of taking a user, geographically identifying them, and then flipping to their currency, there's been some work on that, but none of that is in Commerce Core for 2.x yet. And there's still some discussion on sort of how much of that is going to go into, we put the GeoIP stuff. I think that was literally being worked on last week, actually by someone at Acro, and to figure out how that's going to go. So it's mostly like you set a currency, you use a store, and then if there's any display differences that you're going to do, that hasn't been covered in commerce. Like if it's not what's going to get passed through the thing. Like if you just want to say, hey, this is roughly $20 Canadian, but it's actually going to be $16 American that we're going to charge you or whatever. We're not covering any of that right now. So we'll probably go in the future, isn't covered right now. Last one, super quick on there. Enum is just to add basic enumeration functionality in PHP to map values together and stuff. That's just a requirement, a bunch of those. I won't touch on that one barely at all. So. Commerce 2.x is completely Composer based. Like it requires Composer to set it up because of, in part, all those libraries I just talked about. So if you don't use Composer, you have all these dependencies that you have to download. And that's just for core commerce. And then it gets worse once you add payment gateways, shipping providers, ERP integrations, all that kind of stuff, because almost all of those are going to use some sort of library as well. So we've tried to say, hey, just use Composer, pull all those libraries in. That's just a hard requirement of commerce. So, for better, I love Composer, so I think that's a really good idea, but it does add that as a requirement. You could probably work around it. No one has really bothered yet, so just to get that out of the way. Stores. So Commerce 2.x actually has the concept of stores now, whereas before in Commerce or in UberCart, without any add-ons, you basically had sort of, everything was one store. Everything was in the same catalog, everything could be purchased in the same checkout. You could add rules and stuff like that, but you had to do it all within the same setup. Right from the get-go, Commerce 2.x has the concept of stores, store types, so that you can, maybe it's just something really simple. Maybe you just set up one store. That's the default setup. You probably don't even really care about stores then. But maybe you set up a simple, you have your US one, your Canada one, and your international one. So you set up 3 stores. They have different products that are available, because maybe some products you don't ship internationally, some you don't ship, US and Canada, that kind of stuff. But it can even be used for the setup where you have your users can create stores. So they can all create their own personal store, which can have its own parameters. Stores are, they're full entity setup, so they're bundleable and everything. So you can make your own store types, even and everything, to handle that of you have 10,000 users and they all make their own store or whatever. I don't know if it will scale up to 10,000 yet. We haven't really tested that part, but we'll just pretend it will. So yeah, to give that functionality that you would have to otherwise set up multiple Drupal instances or something like that in Commerce 1.x. So, okay, so products and variations. If you've used Commerce 1, especially if you used Commerce 1 back before inline entity module was standard, it was actually really terrible to set up a product. It seems like really easy. You would add a product to Commerce. That's like the basic e-commerce functionality is like add products. If you can't add products, what can you do? But it was surprisingly difficult because you would add what Commerce 1.x referred to as products was a single sort of line item that you could purchase. So it had a SKU, it had a price, it probably had some other parameters with it. But that's not how users buy a product. You don't buy a specific SKU. You buy what's actually sort of, that's actually what Commerce 2 refers to as a product variation. So if you're going to buy a t-shirt, if you're selling a t-shirt, you don't sell the medium one and the large one and the extra large one. You just sell that t-shirt with that design, and then those are variations of that same product. So a user looking at that product, they don't want to search for that specific thing. So in Commerce 1.x, you had to actually make your own node, and then you had to give it a product reference field, and then you had to add those individual products to it, and then that sort of together made a product. But you kind of had to do that yourself. And if you didn't know how to do that, well, you needed to figure out how to do that because that was really the only way that it actually worked. That's why there was a lot of use of Commerce Kickstart because it had that set up. And it shouldn't have really needed that because that's a weird way to do it. So what Commerce 2 has is it's tried to streamline that. So it has the concept of products and product variations. So what you do is you go in and you make a product, and then through that you add variations to it. So it follows the more logical flow that a user of the site or an admin would actually expect. So you go in, you add a product, you go in, you go, here's the, maybe we just have a single version, we add the SKU, and that's it. This product only has one variation, that's fine. It's basically one and the same. Or maybe we go and we add, the blue one, the red one, the green one, the blue large one, the blue medium one, the blue small one, and we add all these variations as they tree out. But it's all through this sort of product interface. You can add variations standalone if you really want, but you don't have to do that out of the box, and it's clear that you don't need to do that. So that makes it a lot better. In part with that, inline entity form is required by default. It's just a dependency of Drupal Commerce. So that means that's what handles that functionality of when you add a product, you can add all these variations inside of it. It seems like a sort of minor thing, but it's a whole sort of module setup that had to be built to enable that kind of functionality. And the last thing is, and this sort of touches on everything for commerce, but everything is a bundle in Commerce 2.x. So you can make a type of anything. You can make product variation types, you can make product types, you can make store types, you can make shipment types. Everything can have a type. That doesn't necessarily have a use for everything right now, but it's just come up that there always ended up being a use case where they needed to have that ability, and so that's just built in from the get-go now. It's just absolutely everything that can be a type or it can be a bundle is a bundle. Okay, we'll go on to checkout flows. This is something completely new to Commerce 2.x. In Commerce 1, you just had the checkout. It was the default one that it came with, and you could tweak a couple things and you could move panes around, but you kind of sort of had one for the most part. Commerce 2.x has the concept of checkout flows. So that means you can say, here is my checkout step. I want to require login. I want login to be optional. I want to show shipping. I want to show billing information. I want to have a confirmation page. And so this allows you to do all the different setups that you might need for your store. And you can set multiples of these. So you could have 4 or 5 different flows. And you could say, okay, these types of products go into this flow. Digital goods go into a different flow, maybe because we don't care about shipping, and maybe we don't need to check you for credit check information as much, or something else like that. So you can set up all these different flows, and then you can actually literally just drag and drop them and move them around and pick all kinds of settings for them. They're pluginable too, so you can choose how you want them to display. Like right now, there's just the standard multi-step checkout, where you put in your payment information and then you get a review and you go on from there. But you can do plugins if you want to do, a one-page checkout, or if you want to do more of like a wizard type setup where it sort of walks you through some type of builder. This is meant to facilitate that. In the background behind this, it uses a module called State Machine, which just handles sort of transitioning between these different steps when you can and stuff. We're not going to touch on that really in this talk, but just to let you know that is the sort of back end that is running that part. Okay, payment gateways. Payment gateways weren't really even, this sounds weird, but they weren't even totally part of commerce in 1.x. It kind of had that concept, but only in the sense that it knew it needed to take payment. And it didn't really handle anything outside of that. It didn't have the concept of returns, of avoiding a transaction. It even only sort of had the concept of actually processing a transaction in there, because it didn't really have the concept of a transaction. It just knew if it was paid or not. And so there are still tons of payment gateways built for commerce, but they were all a little bit shoehorned in. If you've actually written one, you kind of understand what that means, because all this functionality was built by each individual module. If you wanted to do returns or like a refund, or you had to do partial payments or something, that all came through the payment gateway module. So it was built to that individual module. It didn't use any core functionality of commerce. So everything was a little different. The bugs were unique to all the payment gateways. If you used 2 gateways, you couldn't depend on them working the same at all, because they just did their completely own thing. Or more likely for a lot of payment gateways in commerce, they just didn't they did payments and that was it. They didn't do voids, they didn't do refunds, they didn't necessarily do recurring payments. Commerce 2.x, it handles all of that. because we've been through that. So it has the full concept of a transaction. So it can have a partial transaction, it can refund a transaction, it can void a transaction, it can have all those steps, and those are built right into the payment gateway setup and the payment architecture. And so what this means is that building a payment gateway in Commerce 2.x is actually way, way easier, because you don't really have to build any of the logic to take it. You just have to hook into the function. So you say, okay, we're doing a refund. How do I call a refund, in PayPal? Do that, right? And so oftentimes that even means these payment libraries will have, an SDK of some sort. Maybe they even have a PHP implementation. You can pull that in through Composer, as mentioned earlier, and you just call to that function. So you just have to say you have that, you hook into the return section, and you say, okay, here, we're going to call our return function. Here, we're going to call our payment function. Here we'll call our pre-auth and our void and do that. So that means that payment modules are way, way easier to make, and they're way smaller. So I have written up there, the authorize.net module now is like 560 lines for the actual function. There's some YAML in there and info files and stuff like that, but for the actual functionality of it, it is like 560 lines or something like that. And it does more than the old authorize.net module ever did. Because of other things, it has a card on file built in. So everything understands the concept of tokens and tokenization, and hopefully tries to use tokenization as much as possible. So that has a couple of benefits. It means we don't actually store or deal with credit cards, basically, if at all possible, directly. We just try to push them through to the payment gateway, get the token back, and then we store the concept of the token, and that's how we handle, refunds, voids, recurring payments, subscription billing, all that kind of stuff, because we have this token, and so we can just take what's basically this payment, and we can charge to it again and charge to it again, as long as that token is still valid. And then we can even have functionality of, let's check, is the token valid, is it not valid, let's throw an error for that. So that's all built in. It means no more card on file. That's not a module anymore. It doesn't need to be. And any payment gateway you build, if you use the standard structure, it basically just has that by default. Yeah.
So any treatment of creating quotes, purchase orders, net 30 billing, receivables, those the B2B.
Yeah, so all that stuff is sort of handled by Commerce Offline Payments for the most part right now. Some of that has been sort of replaced by what this does, so not as much of that functionality is needed, and then some more of it is going to be pulled into core as well to handle that concept, because for some of those, you might not use this at all. Like you might just be like, hey, we're taking these invoice payments offline through wire transfer or something like that, or check or something literally. Or it might be where if you do like a net 30 or something like that, hey, maybe we're going to take the credit card now, but we're not going to charge it. But we're going to sit on it, and then maybe we charge it in 30 days if we don't get a pay, or maybe we charge it in 90 days if we don't get a payment through some other form for you or something like that. We didn't really have that concept of a delayed payment that much in Commerce 1. It was kind of meant to be like you take payment right now, and then we're done, and then we don't do payments anymore, right? Whereas now we have the concept of keeping that token and being able to do stuff at any point in the future. If it is this 30, or if it's like payment plans, for example, if it's like, hey, you're going to pay this over 4 installments kind of thing or something. It's not just you pay and then you're gone and then that's it. So it's this continuous. Yeah, there's a question.
Do you have built-in support for token updates if people got updated
Yes.
their credit cards because they're stolen, lost, or credit card expired?
Yeah, that is going to depend a little bit on what the payment gateway supports, because not all payment gateways support that, but say like Stripe or something supports that no problem.
Yeah.
And so that's fine. So we will just, we can request, and it will either, the same token will still be valid, and they will just do that completely on their end. I mean, we'll just use the same token as if nothing has ever changed, because we don't actually store the credit card number. So
No,
we
they
don't,
store the
yeah, we just store the token, so we don't really care what changes in the background. Or if the token becomes invalid, most of them will still have the setup where we request, and this is built into Commerce 2.x, and they say, hey, you need to pull this new token, and then it'll basically do that handshake in the background. And as far as the user is concerned, it doesn't really matter. And even as far as the person building the payment gateway, you sort of barely have to care about that. You have to just make sure the functionality is in to have that work, but Commerce understands the fact that a token becoming invalidated and having to get a new token and everything. A lot of this was built around Braintree, which was the first payment gateway to be built for Commerce 2.x. They sponsored a bunch of the development. And so we tried to go through sort of all these edge cases and stuff of, what about if a token becomes invalid? What do we do this? What about all these recurring billing setups and everything? And so it's pretty robust. It took longer than expected. There were a number of payments were going to land in May, June, July, August, and they landed in like September. But it covers pretty much every use case. So far, don't hold me to that. But there was a question. Is there?
Carbon file work with PayPal?
Yes-ish. That depends on which PayPal you're talking about, because there are a whole bunch of different versions. And so you need something that's going to do tokenization. When I mentioned Braintree, Braintree is actually going to become the standard for PayPal. PayPal purchased Braintree, and so that is going to be the setup they use. So if you're using that, which if you have a PayPal account, you can already use Braintree. That's fine. Like your account will transfer over. So that supports all of that. Some of the versions of PayPal will support tokenization. Some of the ones that they're deprecating won't. I can't remember off the top of my head which ones are which because they're all WPP and WPS, and I forget which one is what. But so yes, mostly for PayPal. There is the functionality like you can build these if they don't have this tokenization stuff, but it's sort of a token first kind of architecture to try to work with that because it lets us have all this functionality as standard, and if we don't do this token setup, then everything has to be done unique. So you can still do it unique, there's nothing preventing you from doing that, but if you want to use this token setup, it doesn't need to support that. So.
Cross-order or account balance. So like, you've got a couple orders out and you've paid part of 3 of them. And
so yes and no. It definitely handles that like on a per order basis. Like if you've paid part of one, and it can handle that. Not out of the box if you have like 3 orders and you owe part on 2 of them and all of the other one and you want to pay that. Right now that would be 3 separate transactions that would have to all be filled, as 3 different things, right? Yeah, so each order. So I mean, you could wrap that, so that to the customer it seemed transparent, but it's still going to be 3 setups on the back. You could possibly combine them into one new transaction, but that is not part of Commerce built in. You would have to take that and use the token to initiate a new transaction for that total. So, I think I hit everything there. Oh, that's just a link if you literally want to see that I wasn't lying about the 600 lines of code thing. Taxes. Taxes are super boring, so I'll try to go fast on this part. The support for VAT is actually included this time, and will probably actually work. So that's the concept of if you're not familiar with VAT, of taxes being included in the price. Oftentimes, or that's there's inclusive or exclusive VAT and stuff like that. But specifically, what we're talking about for the most part there is when it's inclusive. So if something's costs $20, but it actually costs like $18.75, and then the $1.25 is actually taxed, but that needs to adjust. And those can get a bit complicated when you try to apply discounts and sales and things like that, because you have to have that sort of slide and adjust accordingly. If you want to have that product cost not $20 but $15, you're actually not giving a $5 discount. You're giving less than that because then the tax is also changing, and it gets very. Joel should know all about that, but as in how terrible it is, not how to fix it. Don't ask him any questions. It's very difficult. But if anyone's fought with it in Commerce 1.x related to discounts or something, it's horrendously difficult. So that's going to work a lot because we do a thing called price adjustments versus what we used to do before with bundling and stuff all together. But I will talk about that later. Taxes are set up per store. With stores I talked about before, that's pretty straightforward. It uses the zone and tax libraries, like I kind of touched on, to sort of combine together to build that into taxes. EU stuff comes by default, like I said. But all of this, you still might have to use a tax service. Like I said, tax can be really, really wonky. If you just sell from like a state that like doesn't do tax and doesn't require you to collect tax, then that's awesome. You should just do that. Or sell from like some like Caribbean country that doesn't care about that. But if you have physical locations in a whole bunch of states and countries and stuff, you might still need a tax service. At least we haven't come up with a great way to replicate that, because in the end it comes down to having all the data for that, and you might literally get to the point where you have to take is what tax applies to this address, and it's to the level of detail where people probably have that address listed, in a database and say which tax record applies to it. So that's sort of way above what we want to touch in e-commerce. So. Oh, that is, I almost forgot there. There is actually a pretty good blog post that Boyan wrote explaining sort of all of our taxes and what in Commerce 2.x, what the thought process was. And there's actually quite a few comments below that sort of explain it. And mostly people bitch about how complicated taxes are, but still not too bad. Promotions. So discounts and coupons are in core now, and they are called promotions, because that's a little more generic, and I don't know. They decided to call it that for whatever reason. If you've worked with discounts and coupons in 7, they're not amazing. They're very, very, very buggy. So we have what's called promotions now, which are basically sort of all merging together. So all a coupon is just a code attached to a discount of some sort. So a coupon isn't a big sort of fancy thing by itself. It's just a sort of a pluggable system to supply code. So that can be, in this, I didn't actually even really show it here in a screenshot because it's being built as we speak and isn't totally finished. But it'll be the system where you can provide just a simple one-off coupon code, or you can buy coupon codes per user, or you can randomly generate masses of them and stuff like that. That's sort of a plug-inable piece, and then those are paired with a discount. And then the discount itself, it doesn't use rules anymore, because Commerce actually doesn't require rules as a dependency for 2.x, which if you've used Commerce is like pretty interesting. It uses basically the sort of built-in conditions functionality that comes from Drupal core. And this is all sort of plugin based. So you can provide your plugins which provide additional conditions. Right now they're pretty basic. That's kind of once we probably hit RC or something like that, those are going to flesh out. Right now I showed the example of its total amount. So it's just the total amount of your order. And you can pick that as a condition, but you don't necessarily do the rules setup where you pick like event, condition, action, and do this big sort of logic tree and everything, which was pretty flexible, but also pretty prone to problems. What is here is basically the event and the action are sort of predetermined for you, and you're just figuring out the condition. Yes?
Is that sort of like the basic between all like the subsystems of Commerce now, like using the Drupal concept?
Yes. So I'm touching on it here, but that's going to be the same, for shipping, for payments, for taxes and stuff like that. It's all going to use the same sort of condition setup. And the plugins are, for the most part, going to transfer between any of those or whatever. So if it's like order total, it's the same plugin doing that order total math for any of those instances where it's being used. MacLamin did a whole bunch of sort of UX work to make this sort of work nicely in line. Like conditions have actually, like they're used a ton in Drupal core, but they're mostly like kind of under the surface or whatever, and so you don't see them as often. So this is kind of a nice inline thing where we can pull it in and sort of tree out these conditions and stuff. But they're not going to be quite as complex as the rules stuff, and more if you want to do something really complex like that, it would be probably more recommended to build a plugin that does that versus trying to sort of build it all out in the UI, and which is kind of awful. So yes, so the condition stuff, good. And then price adjustments, which I hinted at before. In Commerce 1.x, how any price change was done, like taxes or discounts, anything like that, was you actually sort of took there was a sort of price object that was attached to your line item for any products or anything you had, and that would actually be adjusted. So you sort of, you didn't keep all your original data and modify it. You took it and you said, okay, it was $20, now it's $15. So we don't do it that way anymore because that tended to have a lot of problems because you'd lose sort of your original data that you maybe needed to do calculations on. It's like, oh, you just change it. Well, but that's not how it works. We need to sort of apply things and they need to stack in various ways. So we do price adjustments. Now, And so those are actually, so that product will always be $20 in there, and then we will have an additional thing that's going to pair with it, a price adjustment, which will say, okay, minus $5, and which will go through. And so that lets the sort of logic run through that and say, okay, here's all our adjustment, go through, calculate what the total is, put the total out at the bottom. So we go, hey, we want to take $5 off, we want to do this, set the tax, do that kind of stuff. Or in this case, it would be like, hey, we don't actually want to take $5 off, but we want to make the price be $5 less. So, what are the adjustments we need to do to cause that to happen? So I didn't write the price adjustment stuff. I can't ask questions in super great detail about it, but if you have stuff, I can always take a shot at it. Shipping. Shipping I can answer questions about because I helped do a whole bunch of the sort of planning and architecture and stuff of shipping. Shipping, just as a side note, is not in core. It is a sort of add-on module setup. It will probably go into core at some point. That won't be that soon. So shipping has been kind of completely redone from the sort of basics that it existed in Commerce 1.x. And so it counts shipping as, in 1.x, shipping was basically getting a shipping rate. And it really didn't handle anything other than that. It got a rate, and then once the order went through the cart and was checked out, shipping didn't matter anymore, right? It somehow just magically got to you or whatever. Like there was no fulfillment or shipping or actually sending the package out. We didn't care. We had the rate and the money, and that was not our problem. Now we have the concept of a shipment that is going to persist, or multiple shipments even for a single order, that is going to persist all the way through the workflow. The parts before the checkout actually being sort of the easier and lesser parts of that, because you only kind of care about rate and maybe some other stuff. If you see, this is actually a graphic you don't have to worry about it if you can't see it in detail. It's just pulled from the blog article that I wrote that's linked at the bottom there. And it just sort of shows how many steps that we actually have to go through because there's so much more to shipping than rates. There is how many products you can fit in one box, what size of boxes you have, where are your products located? Are they all in one warehouse, or are they in 4 different warehouses? We do the pricing of if they're all in one box and they're located in 4 different warehouses. Well, that's kind of stupid. That doesn't help, because we need to do that in 4 separate shipments. And so we have this sort of setup where we have basically what's called a shipment, or you can even do a hook into it to split things up into multiple shipments. And then you do all your logic on that. You're not actually doing your logic on the order, because the order is just sort of the request. The shipments is actually what's going to happen with all the data. So how are we going to package it? And then what are we going to generate for it? Because there's a lot of stuff you actually have to generate when you do shipping as well. Because you don't just put it in the box and then the Santa Claus picks the box up and it goes to people on Christmas and it's amazing. You have to put packing slips in there. You have to put, you have to have a label on the box. Who does it come from? Where does it go to? If you're only shipping like 10 things a month, you can just write that out. It's fine. If you're shipping 10,000 things a month, you can't write that out because it's terrible. And so if we need to have that print out automatically, we need to have packing slips print out to go inside the box. We might need to have lots of specific info on that packing slip. If we're shipping across the border, then we need to say what these goods are. Do they qualify for NAFTA, if that's still going to exist much longer? But do they qualify for Trump tax or whatever it'll be? I don't know, right? Can we ship them? What's the average? What's the value we think they are? So what tax is going to apply to them? There's all this stuff that has to happen afterwards, and we actually know a lot of that info. We probably know what category they're in. We know the pricing for them and stuff. So let's do that, and let's generate these packing slips, these labels, this kind of stuff, and we need to know the shipments to do all that, and so we can hook in to that. This did make. Oh, and like I mentioned before, it does use conditions, the same stuff. That taxes and all that stuff uses. Beta 1 did come out last week, maybe the week before. So shipping can actually be used. It's a little basic right now. It doesn't have all the add-ons for, there's no FedEx module, there's no UPS module, there's nothing like that. It's mostly just flat rate stuff right now, and the conditions are a little thin. But you do have shipping. It does create the shipments, all the cool stuff like packing slips and that kind of thing that I talked about. The plugins haven't been written to add those on, but the architecture is there to allow that to happen. We were supposed to get more of this built, but then we got really busy with client work, and so it's mostly been done by Commerce guys. So it's mostly Becky's fault for that, really, actually. You know, she sells for us, and she sold too many things. So, the next one. Okay, so where are we first? Okay. Modules that are in core now. So this is a whole big list, and I'll post these slides later if you can't read everything that's on there. This is stuff that is all in Drupal core now, either because it's been rolled in or because it's covered in core and it's just the module isn't needed anymore. So it's actually a lot of stuff. And this isn't completely everything, but we took a list of about the top 50 most popular modules, and then we went through to see what wasn't needed for the most part anymore. Apologies if you make any of these modules. You're no longer needed. I kid, please do something else. There's lots of stuff to do, so just, you don't get off scot-free or anything now if your thing's covered and you just, get to loaf off now. So I touched on most of them, but it's quite a long list, of, like I said, there was 50, and, there's nearly 20 of them covered there of the top 50, so that's pretty good. And then just for a little bit of update, current payment gateway support. So these are payment gateways that in Commerce 2.x already have an implementation. The implementations might be pretty alpha, but for the most part, they're actually not that bad because building them is so much simpler now. This list is going to be slanted towards ones that are tokenized because those are the easiest ones to make, although that does seem to be sort of the trend for things goes. And thanks to Commerce Guys France because they put together this list. I linked to it at the bottom there. You'll see some of these, if you are looking for them, they may not be up on the Drupal.org module pages necessarily. They will be linked in there. They might be in GitHub repos and stuff like that. They're being added in, but some of them have been done like only very recently. So,
how very recently is that? Because I recall looking not that long ago, and basically it was nothing.
this is like as of like a week ago.
Yeah,
So like
okay.
real recent. Yeah, and like some of them, they're pretty quick to make. So like sometimes people have been knocking out a payment gateway in like under 10 hours kind of thing or something. So some of them, like Stripe was only done a month ago or something like that, and some of them are even more recent than that. So and like I said, if you look, you might not necessarily have seen all of these because they're not all up on the module pages and yet, because sometimes they were done by the person who wasn't the original module maintainer, and the sort of Drupal bureaucracy has to happen and stuff to get them in. So that's why they're sort of linked off there. So this list is even 2 months ago it was Braintree and Authorize.net, and that was probably about it. So we're getting to the point as we're in late betas and stuff now that people are actually starting to fill in the payment gateways. The only ones that have been done by Commerce Guys are the first two, Braintree and Authorize.net. Some of the PayPal stuff has been contributed by Commerce Guys as well, although they didn't fully do that one, and all the rest are contrib. So when the hell is Commerce 2.x going to come out? I drug you along. That was all you really wanted from this. But I made you listen to me for 45 minutes. So beta 6 is going to come out next week, which actually a lot of what I talked about is not necessarily in beta 5 right now, is going to be in 6. There's just lots of little fixes and things like that. The big stuff that was being worked on was shipping, so now that that is out in beta 1, we'll do beta 6, which should be the last beta, and then there'll be RC probably for about the end of March-ish. Those are Serbian timelines, so they're like a bit questionable. But it should actually be not too bad because that's the only 4 things outstanding there. If you use Commerce 2.x right now, it's actually quite stable. There's a little bit more work to do on taxes. Some of the stuff I talked about is just kind of in a branch and needs to be merged in, so that's some of the work of finishing taxes. Optimistic order locking needs to go in, a slight touch on that. Commerce 1.x uses pessimistic order locking, or terrible, awful order locking. That basically, if you load up an order, it's locked for the duration of the page load, and nothing else can do anything with it. So if you load up a report that loads up 100 orders, they're all locked for the duration of that page load. And if people are trying to say check out at the same time, and you happen to pull their order up in a report, they can't check out. There's some patches and stuff to improve that in 1.x, but the whole concept is going to be different, and it's going to be optimistic order locking, which means we assume an order is fine, and then we try to update it, and if we can't because it's marked as being changed since we last loaded it, then we will throw an error and we will deal with it at that point, versus locking them when they load and assuming we need to keep them safe, which is kind of a bad way to do it. So that's changing. That's, if you dealt with a bunch of performance, that's actually really, really cool, or whatever. But if you haven't, then whatever. There's still a tiny bit more work to just finalize payment stuff. In there, it's mostly sort of polish and clean up. And then promotions, like I said, coupons and stuff are being worked on right now. And the conditions, like I showed you, it was like order total, they're very minimal. So that stuff needs to be padded out. But that's actually pretty easy work to do. If you want to follow along, that link on the bottom, and I'll share all these slides after so you don't have to like write things down or take pictures all the time and stuff. Has the sort of status updates for that. It shows what's still outstanding, and it's updated pretty regularly with what needs to be added, or what has been fixed, and hopefully not many new things get added to that. But what's the next thing? Quick note, those are a couple of existing Commerce 2.x sites that are already up. Sport Obermeyer, you've probably seen Commerce Guys did a bit of a talk and a couple of things like that if you look that up. They have one that was done with like a real beta version of Commerce, so they could do it because they kind of know how that all works. But it was done a little bit ahead. And then LivePerson, the live chat company, which is something that Acro has done, they use it for some of their smaller sites for some sort of like one-off small landers and stuff like that, but they're in the progress of porting all of their stuff that uses Drupal Commerce over to Commerce 2.x and Drupal 8 right now. Okay, that's just sort of the last stuff. We'll take questions here, but if you have any questions after this, you can always post them on the Slack channel for this talk. You can always hop on IRC for Drupal Commerce. It's actually pretty active these days. Everyone's getting kind of hyped and excited about 2.x, so people can probably answer questions in there pretty quickly. I will probably be speaking at DrupalCon, although I can't officially say that. And you can also stop by our booth/table here and talk to us. We may or may not be there, or we may just be eating a sandwich and not pay attention to you. No promises. And then this talk is hopefully recorded. We attempted to record it now. Hopefully Evan's giving me the thumbs up. So if it's wrong, it's his fault. And if you want to look at other stuff, DrupalCommerce.org and Acro Media, we both have stuff on our blogs. I will say right now, the documentation kind of sucks. I'm sorry for that. We have a big push to add a whole bunch more documentation. Right now, there are 10 or so pages for basic stuff of like, here's how to get set up with make products and things like that. There's a sort of very thin level of documentation. A lot of it, you're best just to ask in chat or something. We're working on the documentation. It's coming by. It's like Drupal 8 itself or whatever. The documentation is kind of following behind the work. So apologies for that in advance. We do still have a little bit of time. Okay, questions. Okay, there.
Yeah, I got a couple questions, but before I ask, I don't know if you caught it or not, but there was a pop-up when you're talking saying that your laptop battery was critically low. And so if you're recording it, you might want to try and
save that?
Yeah.
Don't we just want to live on the edge? Like,
yeah, okay.
2%.
2%.
Okay.
You got this. You good. Yeah, just click stop.
I feel better.
That was just like some memento stuff you guys witnessed there.
So,
Was that killing you the whole time? Like, just like, that you knew it was going to die? Or like...
We're all waiting.
Yeah. Yeah, you guys all said nothing. And you're just like, come on.
I didn't want to interrupt you.
Yeah. We're good, thank you.
My question is, in the beginning of your talk, you touched on integration, like to
Yeah.
an ERP.
Mhm.
Do you guys have an API into this data that we could then use?
I want to know the answer to that too.
Yeah. So as in that they're all entities and that everything is handled through services and stuff like that that comes through Drupal 8, yes. As far as any custom work for that, specific to commerce, not yet, no.
Okay.
Mhm.
Is it on the roadmap?
It is on the roadmap. It probably, to be honest, work will not. Actualis, who is the Commerce Guys France, might get to it a bit sooner. Otherwise, from us, it's on our roadmap to start in probably the beginning of summer.
Okay.
So it's still a little bit of a ways out.
Okay, and then anything on like a module for EDI, for like some B2B?
Yeah, which is probably after that. Then, so it is going to come up. A lot of that stuff is unfortunately in the sort of latter half fall kind of thing on our roadmap of there's doing a bunch of that sort of underlying work for that in the summer and then transitioning to fall to, I don't know, to be honest, where an EDI one is going to fall in exactly. That might vary a little bit depending on what we get for client projects, to be honest. If we get a big one that requires that immediately, it's, it'll be way sooner. If we don't, it'll probably be fall kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
My question briefly for you is in the shipping page, you had like a check inventory thing. I was just wondering if that was like the support level in Commerce core, and just to give you like a hypothetical situation you've dealt with before, like selling, let's say, a seat to a Canucks game.
And there we're done. So sorry.
Obviously, like if you're selling a seat, you're essentially locking that product for the duration of an order, or it times out or whatever. Then obviously you want to release it to other people to buy it.
So all the shipment stuff is built to handle that concept, to hook in for that. The stock stuff is still in progress right now. It's not in core. It will probably run into core on kind of like a 2.1 kind of thing, like a sort of semantic versioning style setup. But it isn't going to make it right at the start. It's in work and it's all been covered in the planning, but there isn't much actual code behind it. So.
Speaking of roadmap, so Drupal Commerce 2 was very big. Drupal Commerce 1 was very big. UberCart was very big. Is there a plan to try and stabilize on 2.x for some time until some radical new paradigm shift in Drupal comes along?
Yeah, but I say yes because what if they decide some real crazy bullshit for Drupal 9? Then maybe not. This is the idea. It was a really big thing. Given the level of work that went into it, I wonder if Commerce guys would even second guess themselves of doing all of this work, because it has been like about a 4-year process to get to this point. It's been very, very long, and even, Drupal 8 took longer than expected, right? And so we were a victim of that, and then we've had our own issues as well to take. So that is the plan, to not change anything anytime soon, but I couldn't unfortunately promise that, because we are still a module set of Drupal, so depending on what they do.
I am content with intent.
Okay, yeah. You can find us and shout at us if that's not the case or whatever, right? So, yeah.
So if I may comment on a question, the comment is, it seems like going from 1.x to 2.x, you got some inspiration after UberCut. Products and product variation.
A little bit. There were some of the parts where it got too damn complicated in 1.x, and so to clean them up. The architecture underlying it is very different than UberCart, but some of those things that were more user-friendly to try to pull back in those. There were a few things where the Commerce guys speak about it really well in some of their talks that they do, but they went a little too what they would sort of call developer-centric. In just hey, we'll just provide this functionality, and then everyone can just cover everything with contrib. And it was way too low. You needed so much contrib just to do simple things like add products and do things like that or discounts and stuff that it just didn't really work. An e-commerce site without an easy way to add products and without discounts and without shipping is not much. Right, so all it really is doing is taking payments at that point, right? And it wasn't even that great at that. So yeah, there's been a significant shift towards filling out that and making a lot more of the user experience nicer. There's still a bunch more UX work that has to go in there. We have UX mockups and stuff for promotions and stuff like that, which you saw the sort of scaffolding of it there. But there's a lot more UX cleanup for those kind of things to make them intuitive to someone who can actually hopefully install Commerce. The idea is to not have a Commerce kickstart anymore, to just have Commerce actually be able to do that out of the box and not needing this sort of setup, because Commerce Kickstart was really nice if you used it for a demo for 10 minutes, but then if you actually tried to build off of it, it was very specific to a demo, and it didn't work well as a framework. So I think there was a question in the back first, or no, okay. Yeah.
Can you touch on virtual purchased access or purchase download? Those?
Yeah. So there is basically the concept of product types. And so that's basically built in to handle that. So you could make like, hey, this is a physical product, and you could say, hey, this is a digital product. And those are basically the two examples that we've been working with when building it, to say, this is a digital one that provides access. So then you can set up that demo flow. You can, do all the normal stuff, give access to roles, or enable an account and that kind of thing, and then attach that into recurring billing and stuff like that.
That's all built out.
Yeah. There's probably some bugs and things like that or whatever, but yes, basically. Right. So, question? Was there, Joel, did you have one? Or?
Yeah, I was just going to quickly ask if the pessimistic locking is the same as the Drupal 7 one, or is it something different?
So pessimistic locking is the Drupal 7 stuff, yes. And it's optimistic locking in Drupal 8, which is, so how it works in Drupal.
Is it still pessimistic in Drupal 8, or is that because it was on the to-do list?
Yeah, that landed as of like Wednesday or something. The PRs came through. I don't know if they've officially been merged in, but that was actually some work done by Commerce Guys France. And that had been at least tentatively finished to add that in. It's somewhat pessimistic, or mostly there just isn't order locking that much in 8. It kind of uses some of the default stuff. So the proper optimistic order locking should be almost finished. Like I said, it just needs review and to actually be merged in. But the final stuff, it had gone through actually initial review and it had come back, and it's nearly done. So, yeah. Question over there? Yeah.
Yeah, so the question.
We might have to limit you after a bit, but
here's a question. How close can you come with Drupal Commerce to a recurring billing platform like Chargeify, Recurly, and so on, where you keep track of the fact that there's a library of
really, really close already, actually. So the only part that isn't quite finished is the concept of actually doing the charge. Right? So we have the ability to do it and everything like that, and we just have to have the stuff to track it, to actually say, here's when to do the charge and that kind of stuff. There is some, I would hesitate to even say alpha work there. There is a module, there's like some commerce licensing and license payments and stuff that has been done. It's real sort of prototype level at this point. So all the structure's there, and that's actually not that much work. We sort of looked over it and we have it planned out. It's only like maybe 50 hours of work to build all the module stuff for that. So it should be quite simple. And the idea is to be able to replicate something like Recurly pretty much completely. So, any other questions? We're good? Oh, we're a minute early.